The rattling of wagon wheels against parched earth came to a sudden halt outside the Cedar Creek Mercantile, sending dust clouds billowing into the crisp Montana morning of 1876. Clara Carson stood frozen behind the counter, knowing her father had just returned not with supplies as promised, but with another scheme that would shatter what little remained of her life. "She's worth every penny, Hutchins." Elijah Carson's voice boomed as he flung open the door, a portly middle-aged man in a tailored suit following closely behind. "My daughter may have her mother's stubborn streak, but she'll keep your books straight and your house in order." Clara's blood ran cold. At 22, she had endured her father's gambling debts and drinking binges since her mother's passing 3 years prior. But this was something entirely different. "Father," she whispered, her throat constricting as she recognized Harold Hutchins, the recently widowed merchant from Helena, whose reputation for acquiring both businesses and wives had traveled even to their small settlement of Cedar Creek. "Ah, there she is," Hutchins declared, small eyes appraising Clara like she was a prized mare at auction. "Prettier than you described, Carson. I'll add another 50 to our agreement." Elijah's eyes gleamed with the familiar spark that appeared only when cards or coins were involved. "Always knew you had a good eye for value, Hutchins." Clara clutched the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening. "I'm not for sale, father." "Nonsense," Elijah waved dismissively. "You'll be Mrs. Hutchins come Sunday. The man's offering a fine life in Helena, a proper house with servants, fancy dresses, and all those books you're always buried in. And he settled my debt to McAllister." Harold Hutchins stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal a balding head slick with oil. "I assure you, Miss Carson, you'll want for nothing under my roof. Your father speaks highly of your skills with numbers. My business enterprises require a sharp mind, and my home requires a woman's touch." "And a warm bed, no doubt," Clara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. Hutchins' thin lips curled into what might have been intended as a smile. "You'll learn to appreciate my generosity, Miss Carson. I've had 3 wives before you, all who came to understand their good fortune." 3 wives, all dead before their 30th birthdays," Clara retorted. Tales of Hutchins' previous marriages had reached even their remote settlement whispers of unexplained illnesses and convenient accidents. "Watch your tongue, girl," Elijah barked. "The arrangement is made. Pack your things. We leave for Helena tomorrow morning." "I won't go," Clara declared, squaring her shoulders. Elijah crossed the room with frightening speed, gripping her arm tightly. "You'll do as you're told. For once in your life you'll be of use to this family." "Family?" Clara's laugh held no humor. "We haven't been a family since Mother died." "Perhaps before that." Hutchins cleared his throat. "I'll leave you to your preparations, Miss Carson. I've business to attend to in town, but I'll return this evening to finalize our arrangement." He placed his hat back on his head, nodding at Elijah. "I trust there will be no further difficulties." When the door closed behind the merchant, Clara wrenched her arm free from her father's grasp. "How much did he pay you?" "Enough to clear my debts and start fresh." Elijah's voice softened, showing a hint of the man he'd once been. "Clara, this is a chance for both of us." "A chance for you," she corrected. "And a death sentence for me. Don't be dramatic. Hutchins is respected, wealthy, and 3 times my age with 3 dead wives," Clara finished. "I won't be the 4th." Elijah's expression hardened again. "You will, I've given my word." "Your mother would want you taken care of." "Mother would be ashamed," Clara whispered, the words striking her father like physical blows. "She would never have sold her only daughter to pay for her husband's vices." Elijah's hand rose, but he stopped himself from striking her. "Pack your things. We leave at first light." He turned on his heel and left the store, likely heading for the saloon to celebrate his newfound fortune. Clara stood motionless until the sound of his footsteps faded. Only then did she allow the tears to fall, streaming down her cheeks as she contemplated her limited options. Running away seemed impossible in a territory where a woman alone faced dangers perhaps worse than marriage to Harold Hutchins. Still, she couldn't submit to this fate without a fight. She hurried to the back room where she and her father lived, gathering her meager possessions: 2 dresses, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre her mother had given her. She stuffed them into a small carpet bag, along with the $23 she'd secretly saved from the store's earnings. As darkness fell, the skies opened up, releasing a deluge that Clara took as divine intervention. Her father wouldn't return from the saloon in such weather, giving her precious hours to implement her hastily formed plan. She would make for the Clayton homestead, 10 miles north, where Mrs. Clayton had often expressed fondness for Clara. Perhaps they would shelter her until she could find work in another town. Donning her heaviest woolen cloak, Clara slipped out into the raging storm. The wind whipped her auburn hair across her face as she struggled against the mud-slicked road. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating her path in brilliant flashes before plunging her back into darkness. She had barely made it a mile out of town when her boots sank into a deep puddle, throwing her off balance. Clara fell hard, her carpetbag landing in a muddy pool. She choked back a sob as she struggled to her feet, her dress now soaked and heavy, clinging to her shivering form. The sound of approaching hoofbeats caused her heart to seize with fear. Had her father discovered her absence so soon? Or worse, had Hutchins returned early? She scrambled behind a large boulder, pressing herself against the cold stone as a lone rider emerged through the curtain of rain. The man rode tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders covered by a slicker that rippled in the wind. His horse, a powerful chestnut stallion, moved with confident steps despite the treacherous conditions. Clara held her breath as the rider drew closer, then gasped as lightning revealed his face, not the feared visages of her father or Hutchins, but a stranger with strong features partially obscured by several days' growth of beard. The stranger reined his horse to a halt, his head turning in her direction. "Show yourself," he called, his voice deep and steady against the howling wind. "I mean no harm." Clara remained frozen, weighing her options. The stranger reached for something at his side, and fear propelled her into motion. "Don't shoot," she cried, stepping from behind the boulder with raised hands. The man's expression registered surprise as he lowered what turned out to be a canteen, not a gun. "I'm not in the habit of shooting young women caught in storms," he said, a hint of gentle humor in his voice. "Are you all right, miss?" "I'm fine," Clara replied automatically, though her violent shivering betrayed the lie. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his horse closer. Standing before her, he was even more imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with eyes that appeared gray in the dim light. "You're half drowned and a long way from shelter," he observed. "Where are you headed?" Clara hesitated, unwilling to reveal her destination to a stranger. Understanding her caution, he removed his hat, water cascading from its brim. "Garrett Zimmerman, madam. I'm heading to Cedar Creek on business." "Clara Carson," she replied, deciding that honesty about her name at least couldn't hurt. "I was traveling to visit friends when the storm caught me." Garrett's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly doubting her story, but he didn't press. "Well, Miss Carson, you won't make it far in this weather. Cedar Creek is closer than wherever you're bound. Let me escort you back to town." "No," Clara's vehemence startled them both. "I can't go back there." Garrett studied her for a long moment, rain dripping from his hat brim. You're running from something or someone. It wasn't a question, and Clara didn't treat it as one. She lifted her chin defiantly. I won't force you back, Garrett said finally, but you can't stay out in this storm. There's a lined shack about 2 miles east that belongs to the Rockingham Ranch. We can shelter there until morning. Clara weighed her options. The stranger seemed honorable enough, and death by exposure was a certainty if she continued alone in the worsening storm. Thank you, she said finally. Garrett retrieved her mud-soaked carpetbag, securing it to his saddle before helping Clara mount his horse. He swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her. Hold tight, he instructed, guiding the stallion off the main road and onto a narrow trail that wound through a stand of pines. The lined shack was little more than a one-room cabin with a small lean-to for horses, but to Clara, it appeared as welcoming as a palace when they finally arrived. Garrett helped her dismount, then quickly tended to his horse before joining her inside. The interior was sparse but clean: a small stove in one corner, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against the far wall. Garrett lit a lantern hanging from a ceiling beam, then busied himself starting a fire in the stove while Clara stood dripping on the plank floor. There's a trunk with some old clothes by the cot, Garrett said without looking up from his task. Might be something dry you can change into. I'll step outside while you do. Clara found the trunk and opened it to discover several shirts and a pair of trousers that would swallow her whole, but seemed cleaner than her mud-caked dress. Thank you, she said as Garrett rose to leave, for all of this. He paused at the door, his expression unreadable in the dim light. No need for thanks. Anyone would do the same. No, Clara said softly. They wouldn't. When Garrett returned, Clara had changed into one of the shirts, which hung nearly to her knees, and had spread her dress near the now crackling stove to dry. She'd used a threadbare towel to dry her hair as best she could, and sat perched on the edge of the cot, looking small and vulnerable in the oversized garment. Garrett hung his dripping slicker and hat by the door, then moved to the stove where he put a pot of coffee on to boil. Hungry? He asked, producing jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. Clara nodded, suddenly aware of the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. They ate in silence for several minutes, the storm raging outside while the small cabin grew warm and dry around them. Want to tell me what you're running from? Garrett asked finally, his voice gentle but direct. Clara stared into her tin cup of coffee. My father sold me, she said flatly. To Harold Hutchins, the merchant from Helena. We were to leave tomorrow. Garrett's expression darkened. Sold you, as in marriage, Clara nodded. To settle gambling debts. Hutchins has had 3 wives already, all dead before their 30th birthdays. She looked up, meeting Garrett's gaze directly. I won't be the 4th. No, Garrett agreed, surprising her with the vehemence in his voice. You won't. You know of him? Clara asked. I know his type, Garrett replied grimly. Men who treat women as property to be acquired and discarded. He set his cup down with deliberate care. Where were you planning to go? The Clayton homestead first, then perhaps to Helena to find work, though not if Hutchins remains there. Helena's where I'm headed after my business in Cedar Creek, Garrett said. I could escort you there if you wish. Clara studied him carefully. Why would you do that for a stranger? Garrett's smile was brief but genuine. Perhaps I have a sister who once needed similar help. Perhaps I believe no one should be forced into servitude, marriage or otherwise against their will. And what is your business in Cedar Creek? Clara asked. I'm looking for someone, Garrett replied, a shadow crossing his features. A man who owes a debt. Not money, I think, Clara observed. No, not money. Garrett changed the subject. Rest now. We'll figure out our next steps in the morning. Clara wanted to ask more questions, but exhaustion overtook her. She lay down on the cot while Garrett spread his bedroll on the floor near the stove. Despite the circumstances, Clara felt safer than she had in years, and sleep claimed her quickly. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world and brilliant blue sky. Garrett was already up, tending to his horse outside. Clara quickly changed back into her now dry dress and folded the borrowed shirt neatly. When Garrett returned, he carried a handful of wild berries. "Breakfast," he offered with a smile that transformed his serious face. They ate quietly, then prepared to depart. As Garrett saddled his horse, Clara gathered her courage. "Who are you looking for in Cedar Creek?" she asked. "Perhaps I can help." Garrett paused, his hands stilling on the saddle strap. "A man named Elijah Carson." Clara's breath caught in her throat. That's my father." Garrett turned to face her, his expression grave. "Yes, I suspected as much when you gave your name last night." "What has he done to you?" Clara asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Her father had accumulated many enemies through his gambling and scheming. 3 years ago, your father cheated my brother out of our family's ranch in a rigged poker game," Garrett said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "My brother took his own life that night, leaving behind a wife and infant son. I've been tracking your father ever since, working to build evidence of his crooked dealings." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's not your sin to apologize for," Garrett replied, his tone softening. "But I need to see justice done." "What kind of justice?" Clara asked, suddenly afraid for her father despite everything. "The legal kind," Garrett assured her. "I'm not a killer, Clara. I've gathered testimonies from others he's cheated, evidence of marked cards, weighted dice. The territorial marshal in Helena has agreed to arrest him once I present my case." Clara absorbed this information slowly. "That's why you're going to Helena after Cedar Creek," Garrett nodded. "I didn't know about Hutchins, though. That complicates things." "How so?" "If your father is arrested, Hutchins might still claim you as property purchased in good faith." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Unless." "Unless what?" "Unless you were already married to someone else," Garrett said carefully. Clara stared at him. "Are you suggesting?" "A marriage of convenience," Garrett clarified quickly. "On paper only, to protect you legally until you can establish yourself independently. Once you're settled, we could obtain an annulment." Clara considered the proposal. It was unorthodox, but potentially her safest option. "You would do that for me?" "I would," Garrett said simply. "My quest for justice shouldn't result in another innocent person suffering." Clara took a deep breath. "Then yes, I accept your proposal, Mr. Zimmerman." They rode double into Cedar Creek, arriving as the town was waking. To Clara's surprise, Garrett directed his horse not to the mercantile but to the small church at the edge of town. "We should speak with the minister first," Garrett explained. "Then the marshal." Reverend Phillips was startled by their early morning arrival, and even more surprised by their request for an immediate marriage. However, after Garrett explained the situation, omitting certain details about his history with Elijah Carson, the kindly minister agreed to perform the ceremony. "I've heard troubling rumors about Mr. Hutchins," he admitted, "and I've long worried about your situation, Miss Carson. If this arrangement will keep you safe, I'm willing to help." The ceremony was brief and simple. Clara wore her cleanest dress, and Garrett had taken time to shave and don a fresh shirt. They exchanged plain bands that the minister provided from a small collection left by previous parishioners who had passed on. "I, Garrett, take thee, Clara." The words were formal and traditional, but as Garrett spoke them while looking into her eyes, Clara felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett hesitated only briefly before leaning down to place a gentle, chaste kiss on her lips. It lasted mere seconds, but Clara felt the warmth of it long after they parted. Their next stop was the marshal's office, where Garrett presented his evidence against Elijah Carson. Marshal Thompson listened carefully, examining the affidavits and studying the marked cards Garrett had collected. "This is compelling, Zimmerman," he acknowledged. "I'll bring Carson in for questioning." He glanced at Clara. "Though I'm sorry to say, Mrs. Zimmerman, this may be difficult for you." "I understand," Clara replied, the new title still strange to her ears. "But justice must be served." They didn't have to wait long. Word of Clara's marriage spread quickly through the small town, reaching the saloon where Elijah had spent the night drinking away his newfound wealth. He burst into the marshal's office in a rage, stopping short at the sight of his daughter standing beside a tall stranger. "What's this nonsense about you being married?" he demanded. "It's true, father," Clara replied calmly. "May I introduce my husband, Garrett Zimmerman?" Elijah's face drained of color as recognition dawned. "Zimmerman, you're William's brother." "I am," Garrett confirmed, his voice cold, "and I've come to settle accounts." Marshal Thompson stepped forward. "Elijah Carson, I'm detaining you on suspicion of fraud and illegal gambling operations. We'll be sending for the territorial judge to hear these charges." "This is absurd," Elijah spluttered. "You can't." "We can and we are," the marshal interrupted, producing handcuffs. "And I should mention that Mr. Hutchins left town rather hurriedly this morning when he heard about your daughter's marriage. Seems he didn't want to face her new husband." As the marshal led her father away, Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Garrett placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, surprising herself by meaning it. "For the first time in years, I think I am." The following days passed in a whirlwind. With her father in custody awaiting trial, Clara took full control of the mercantile, discovering that, despite Elijah's gambling, the business itself was sound. Garrett stayed in town, helping her organize the accounts and taking up temporary residence in the small room above the store. Their arrangement was entirely proper. Garrett insisted on sleeping on a pallet on the floor while Clara took the bed. They shared meals and conversation, gradually revealing more about themselves to each other. Clara learned that Garrett had been working as a horse trainer for various ranches while pursuing justice for his brother. He discovered her love of literature and her dream of someday opening a proper bookshop. "You'd be good at it," he told her one evening as they sat by the stove, Clara reading aloud from her dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre. "You have a way with words." Clara looked up, caught by the warmth in his gaze. "Thank you, though I'm not sure Cedar Creek is ready for a bookshop." "Helena might be," Garrett suggested. "After the trial, we could see." The casual "we" didn't escape Clara's notice, and she found herself hoping, against all practicality, that their arrangement might become something more permanent. The opportunity to test these feelings came sooner than expected. Harold Hutchins returned to Cedar Creek with 2 hired guns, determined to reclaim what he considered his property. They confronted Clara as she was closing the mercantile one evening. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Hutchins sneered the name, "or should I say Miss Carson? I've learned some interesting facts about your hasty marriage." Clara stood her ground, though fear prickled along her spine. "Whatever you've heard, Mr. Hutchins, I am legally married." "A marriage of convenience," Hutchins countered, "which can be easily annulled, especially once your husband learns you've been entertaining my company." He stepped closer, his men flanking him. "Come quietly, and I'll ensure your father receives leniency at his trial." "She's not going anywhere with you," Garrett's voice rang out as he emerged from the storeroom, rifle in hand. "And she's my wife in every way that matters." Hutchins smiled thinly. Your marriage license is less than 2 weeks old, Zimmerman. The good reverend admitted you barely knew each other when you wed. It's obvious this was arranged to thwart our prior agreement. The only agreement was between you and her father, Garrett replied, moving to stand beside Clara. And since Carson was selling something that wasn't his to sell, that agreement is void. One of Hutchins' men reached for his pistol, but Garrett's rifle was already trained on him. I wouldn't, Garrett warned. The tense standoff was interrupted by Marshal Thompson's arrival with 2 deputies. Problem here, folks, Marshal. I demand you arrest this man for interfering with a legal contract, Hutchins began. The only contract that matters is their marriage certificate, Thompson cut him off, which I witnessed myself. Now I suggest you leave town, Hutchins. We don't take kindly to men who buy and sell women around here. Hutchins' face contorted with rage, but he was outnumbered. With a final venomous glare at Clara and Garrett, he stalked out, his men following close behind. Once they were alone, Clara turned to Garrett, her heart pounding. Did you mean what you said? That I'm your wife in every way that matters? Garrett set his rifle aside, his expression softening as he gazed down at her. I meant it. These past days with you, I never expected to find this kind of happiness again after William died. I came to Cedar Creek seeking justice, but I found something far more precious. I feel the same, Clara admitted, stepping closer to him. What began as an arrangement has become the most real thing in my life. Garrett reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't want an annulment, Clara. I want a true marriage if you'll have me. In answer, Clara rose on tiptoes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held nothing back. Garrett's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as the kiss deepened, carrying them both beyond the realm of convenience and firmly into love. Elijah Carson was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. Before he was taken away, Clara visited him one last time. I never meant for things to turn out this way, he told her, looking older and diminished in his prison clothes. I know, Clara replied, but perhaps it's for the best. You'll have time to reflect, and when you're released, you can start fresh. And you? Elijah asked. Are you truly happy with Zimmerman? Clara's smile was answer enough. More than I ever thought possible. After the trial, Clara and Garrett made the decision to sell the mercantile and move to Helena. With their combined savings and a small loan from the bank, they purchased a modest storefront with living quarters above, which they transformed into Zimmerman Books and Mercantile. The shop quickly became a gathering place for the growing community. Clara ordered books from as far away as New York and San Francisco, while Garrett managed the practical side of the business, selling quality goods to ranchers and townspeople alike. 1 year after their hasty wedding in Cedar Creek, they renewed their vows in a proper ceremony surrounded by new friends. This time, when they exchanged rings and promises, there was no doubt about the love behind their words. As they stood on the porch of their shop that evening, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, Garrett wrapped his arms around Clara from behind. Did you ever imagine when you fled into that storm that things would turn out this way? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. Clara leaned back against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart. No, I was just running away from one life. I never dreamed I was running toward something so much better. I'm glad I rode through that storm, Garrett murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. So am I, Clara replied, turning in his arms to face him. Though I should tell you something. Concern flickered across Garrett's features. What is it? Clara took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen, which had just begun to show the slightest curve. Our family is growing. Joy transformed Garrett's face as he understood her meaning. He lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace, spinning her once before setting her carefully back down. "Clara Zimmerman, you've made me the happiest man in the Montana Territory." That night, as they lay together in their bed above the bookshop, Clara reflected on the strange twist of fate that had led her from despair to joy. Her father's desperate attempt to sell her had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately brought her true freedom and love. Outside, another storm was brewing, wind rattling the window panes as thunder rumbled in the distance. But Clara felt no fear, only gratitude for the storm that had once driven her into the path of the man who now held her in his arms, the cowboy who had claimed her heart as surely as she had claimed his.